The abduction. Zeke Henderson had always known his morning runs would kill him. He just hadn't expected death to come in the form of 8-foot-tall mantis aliens with attitude problems. The autumn morning had started perfectly, crisp air, empty streets, and his favorite running playlist pumping through his wireless earbuds. He'd nearly completed his usual 5-mile route around Pine Creek when reality decided to take a vacation. The ground beneath his feet vanished, replaced by a shaft of purple light that would have made any disco enthusiast weep with joy. "You've got to be kidding me," Zeke muttered, watching his feet leave the ground. "I was about to beat my personal record." As he floated upward, suspended in the ethereal beam, Zeke's Special Forces training kicked in. Assess. Analyze. Adapt. The underside of what could only be a spacecraft loomed above him, its surface a peculiar mix of organic curves and geometric patterns that defied Earth architecture. The vessel must have been using some kind of cloaking technology. He hadn't seen or heard anything before the abduction began. The purple light deposited him none too gently onto a metallic floor that hummed beneath his feet. Before he could regain his balance, 3 of the mantis-like aliens surrounded him, their compound eyes reflecting his image back at him, a 6'2" human male in running shorts and a sweat-soaked t-shirt that read, "I came, I saw, I needed a nap." "Look," Zeke said, raising his hands slowly, "if this is about that tinfoil hat I gave Thompson for Christmas, I'm really sorry. He swore he saw one of your ships, and I didn't believe him. My bad." One of the aliens jabbed him with what looked like a cattle prod crossed with a smartphone. The sensation wasn't exactly painful, but his entire body tingled as if he'd licked a battery. A holographic display appeared above the device, showing various readings that meant absolutely nothing to him. "Strong specimen," one of them clicked in surprisingly understandable English. "Combat experience detected in muscle memory patterns." "Hey, my muscle memory is none of your business," Zeke protested, flexing his hands. Years of training had taught him to stay calm in crisis situations, but also to analyze every detail for potential advantage. The aliens were tall but spindly, their movements while quick were predictable, like watching a praying mantis in fast forward. The training. The first thing Zeke learned about alien prison cells was that they had terrible room service. After his initial processing and what he assumed was some kind of medical examination, though being scanned by tentacles while floating in green goo hardly qualified as medical in his book, he'd been deposited in what the Varians called initiate quarters. The cell itself was a marvel of alien engineering, a perfect hexagon with walls that shifted colors like oil on water. A force field served as the front wall, offering a panoramic view of the arena below. It would have been impressive if it wasn't also going to be the place where they expected him to die for entertainment. "Rise and shine, meet." The gravelly voice of the arena's AI announcer boomed through hidden speakers. "Training sequence initiates in 10 minutes. Zeke sat up on his bunk, a floating platform of energy that was surprisingly comfortable, and stretched. "Good morning to you too, sunshine. Any chance of getting some coffee before the mandatory violence?" "Sustenance is earned through combat performance," the AI replied. "Current ranking, untested. Current privileges, basic. So that's a no on the coffee." Zeke stood, examining his new attire. They'd replaced his running clothes with what looked like a cross between tactical gear and a sci-fi movie costume, black material that seemed to flow like liquid but hardened on impact. At least they'd given him boots that fit. The force field dissolved, and a floating platform appeared outside his cell. "Training arena access granted. Step onto the transport pad." As Zeke stepped onto the platform, he noticed movement in the neighboring cells. His fellow initiates were also being collected for training. The crystalline being he'd nicknamed Sparkles chimed melodiously as it floated onto its platform. The tiger-octopus hybrid, who'd introduced itself as Thrix through a series of tentacle gestures and empathic projections, slithered onto another. The platforms descended in formation toward a separate arena below the main combat bowl. This training area was smaller but more complex, filled with obstacles, weapon racks, and what appeared to be holographic projection systems. "Welcome to Combat Orientation," the AI announced as they landed. "Today's session will evaluate your combat styles and assign appropriate training regimens. Failure to participate results in immediate termination. Anyone ever tell you your customer service needs work?" Zeke called out, earning a harmonic laugh from Sparkles and what felt like amused emotion waves from Thrix. The first exercise was simple enough: navigate an obstacle course while avoiding automated defense systems. Zeke watched as Sparkles went first, its crystalline form refracting energy blasts and practically dancing through the course. Thrix followed, using its tentacles to swing and slide through obstacles with fluid grace. When Zeke's turn came, he approached it like any other Special Forces training course, with careful observation and calculated risk. The defense systems had patterns. The obstacles were arranged to force specific movements. It was all very human. "Interesting," he muttered, ducking under an energy blast while vaulting over a barrier. "They've designed this based on data from multiple species, but they're using basic military training principles. Someone's been studying Earth's combat techniques." He completed the course with the third best time, behind only Sparkles and a being that seemed to be made entirely of living smoke. But speed wasn't what caught the attention of their captors. "Anomaly detected," the AI announced. "Subject demonstrates advanced pattern recognition and tactical adaptation. Recalibrating training parameters." The next phase introduced weapons training. Racks of alien weaponry materialized, everything from energy blades to projectile launchers that defied physics. Each trainee was expected to demonstrate proficiency with multiple weapon types. "Select your initial loadout," the AI instructed. Zeke approached the weapons rack, his eyes drawn to what looked like a standard combat knife. When he picked it up, the blade hummed and transformed into pure energy. "Now that's what I call an upgrade." Over the next several hours, the initiates were put through increasingly complex combat scenarios. They fought holograms, combat drones, and eventually each other in controlled sparring matches. Throughout it all, Zeke noticed the Vurian observers taking particular interest in his performance. During a brief rest period, Thrix slithered closer to Zeke's position. Through their limited ability to communicate, the creature conveyed a warning: the Varians were especially interested in specimens that showed tactical intelligence. Such fighters often faced the most dangerous opponents in the arena. "They're not just looking for strong fighters," Zeke realized, watching the observer's compound eyes track his movements. "They're studying our combat techniques. This whole setup isn't just an arena, it's a combat research facility." The revelation was interrupted by a new announcement: special evaluation required. Subject: Earth Human. Report to Advanced Assessment Chamber. As Zeke followed a floating guide light toward another section of the facility, he caught glimpses of the main arena through various viewports. The crowds were gathering for the day's matches, their alien forms filling the massive stands. Somewhere up there, the Vurian High Command was watching, analyzing, learning. The assessment chamber turned out to be a perfectly white room with no visible features. As soon as Zeke entered, the door sealed behind him. "Combat Intelligence Evaluation," the AI announced. "Scenario generation commencing." The white room transformed into a perfect replica of an Afghan mountain pass, one Zeke recognized from his service days. The attention to detail was stunning, right down to the specific pattern of rocks he'd once used for cover during a particularly nasty firefight. "How the hell do you have this?" Zeke demanded. "Memory extraction complete during initial processing," the AI replied. "Scenario selected from subject's combat experience. Demonstrate tactical response." As Taliban fighters materialized around him, perfect holographic recreations of that day, Zeke felt a chill run down his spine. The Varians hadn't just scanned his muscle memory, they'd downloaded his actual memories. "Your research goes way beyond simple arena fights, doesn't it?" Zeke muttered, dropping into a combat stance as the scenario began to play out. What are you really preparing for? The holographic Taliban fighters moved exactly as they had that day, but this time Zeke was armed with alien weaponry and his knowledge of how the fight would unfold. As he moved through the familiar scenario with unfamiliar tools, he began to understand the true purpose of the arena. The Varians weren't just running a gladiatorial show, they were cataloging combat techniques from across the galaxy, building a database of tactical responses and warfare strategies. And humans, with their long history of military innovation and adaptation, were of particular interest. As Zeke completed the scenario, achieving a better outcome than the original firefight, he made eye contact with one of the mantis-like observers through an observation window. You wanted to see how humans fight, he thought, allowing a grim smile to spread across his face. Be careful what you wish for. The training day ended with each initiate being assigned a combat class and specialized training regimen. Zeke's designation appeared on his cell's holographic display. Classification: Human Combat Specialist. Threat level: Moderate, subject to review. Special notation: Enhanced tactical processing. Priority observation required. As Zeke lay on his energy bunk that night, listening to the distant roars from the main arena, he began to plan. The Varians had made a critical mistake. They'd given him access to advanced weapons, combat training facilities, and most importantly, time to study their systems. They thought they were preparing him for arena combat, but Zeke was preparing for something else entirely. Every training session was a chance to learn their technology. Every sparring match was an opportunity to evaluate potential allies. Every scenario they pulled from his memories was a reminder of what humans did best: adapt, overcome, and turn their enemies' advantages against them. Thanks for the combat training, he whispered to the empty cell, knowing the observation systems would pick it up. You're going to regret being such good teachers. In the neighboring cell, Thrix pulsed with curious bioluminescence, sensing the change in Zeke's emotional state. Through their crude form of communication, Zeke conveyed a simple message: watch and learn. Class is in session. The true training was about to begin, but not the kind the Varians had in mind. They'd built the perfect facility to study combat techniques from across the galaxy. Now Zeke would show them why humans had a reputation for turning other people's weapons against them. Tomorrow would bring his first real arena match, but tonight was for planning. The Varians wanted to study human combat tactics. He'd give them a lesson they'd never forget. The Rising Champion. The Varians' first mistake was assuming that their moderate threat classification of Zeke was accurate. Their second mistake was broadcasting his fights across their galactic entertainment network. But their biggest mistake? That was giving him an audience. 3 weeks into his captivity, Zeke stood in the arena's preparation chamber, watching the weapon selection hologram cycle through his options. His rating had improved enough to access Category C weapons, still not top tier, but far better than the glorified pointy sticks they'd started him with. Today's match: Human Combat Specialist vs Chronaxian Void Stalker, the AI announced. Current betting odds: 10-1 against human survival. Only 10-1. Zeke selected a plasma staff and what the armory labeled as a temporal displacement grenade. You guys are starting to believe in me. The arena today was configured for urban combat, a maze of metallic structures and elevated platforms that resembled a cyberpunk city block. Perfect for someone who'd spent years training in close-quarters combat. His opponent materialized on the far side of the arena, a creature that seemed to be made of living shadows, its form rippling and shifting like smoke in the wind. The Void Stalker's previous matches had all ended the same way: it would phase through solid matter, appear behind its opponent, and deliver a killing blow before they could react. Begin, the AI commanded. The Void Stalker immediately disappeared into the shadows cast by the urban structures. The crowd's excitement built as they anticipated another quick, brutal finish. But Zeke just smiled. Fun fact about humans, he called out, his voice carrying through the arena's acoustics. We're really good at pattern recognition. He activated the plasma staff, its energy field illuminating the surrounding area. And you, my shadowy friend, have patterns. The creature attacked exactly as expected, materializing behind Zeke with its shadow blade extended. But instead of finding vulnerable flesh, it met the blazing energy field of the plasma staff. The contact forced the Void Stalker into solid form, earning a gasp from the crowd. "See, I watched your previous fights," Zeke explained, pressing his advantage with a series of swift strikes. "You always attack from the dominant shadow cast by your opponent. Predictable. Efficient. Fatal, against anyone who hasn't studied irregular warfare." The Void Stalker retreated, its form flickering between solid and ethereal states. It tried to phase through a wall, but Zeke was already moving, the temporal grenade arcing through the air. "Also," he added, "shadows can't exist in a space where time isn't flowing normally." The grenade detonated, creating a bubble of slowed time. Caught between phases, the Void Stalker found itself trapped in a partial materialization. Zeke's finishing move was almost anticlimactic, a simple plasma staff strike through the creature's now vulnerable core. As the crowd erupted in a mix of cheers and outraged howls, depending on how they'd bet, Zeke noticed something interesting in the VIP observation box. The mantis-like Virian commanders weren't watching him, they were studying holographic readouts of his combat data. Back in his cell after the match, Zeke received an unexpected visitor. A hovering drone delivered a message from the arena's management. His success had earned him an upgrade in accommodations and privileges. "Proceed to Level B housing," the drone instructed. "Your new quarters await." The upgraded cell block was a significant improvement, larger rooms, better amenities, and most importantly, more interaction with other fighters. As Zeke settled into his new space, he spotted familiar faces. Thrix was there, having survived its own matches through clever use of its tentacles and psychic abilities. Sparkles, too, had earned an upgrade, its crystalline form now adorned with what appeared to be battle honors. But it was his new neighbor that caught his attention. In the cell across the corridor was a being that appeared almost human, save for its metallic skin and glowing circuit-like patterns. It noticed his attention and approached the force field. "The human who fights like a tactician," it said in perfectly accented English. "I am Drex, former military advisor to the Cybernetian Defense Force. Your matches have been educational." "Always nice to meet a fellow military man," Zeke replied carefully. "Though I'm curious why someone with your background is in an entertainment arena." Drex's circuits pulsed with what might have been amusement. "The same reason you study your opponents so carefully. We both know this is no mere entertainment venue." Over the next few days, between matches, Zeke and Drex shared observations. The Cybernetians' knowledge of galactic politics filled in crucial gaps in Zeke's understanding. The Varians, it seemed, were relatively new players in the galactic community, but they were ambitious. They rose to prominence through superior combat technology, Drex explained during an exercise period. But technology alone does not win wars. They lack innovation, creativity, the ability to adapt. So they built this place to study other species' combat techniques. Zeke finished the thought. "We're not just fighters, we're research subjects." "Precisely. And humans." Drex's circuits flickered. "Humans have caught their particular interest. Your species' capacity for warfare is impressive. Terrifying, even." Zeke's next match proved even more revealing. His opponent was a biotechnological construct, a creature specifically engineered for arena combat. As he fought it, he noticed its movement patterns incorporated techniques from previous arena champions. After dispatching the construct with a combination of Earth martial arts and alien weaponry, Zeke was escorted to a performance review chamber. The room was filled with Virian scientists and military officers, all studying combat data from his matches. "Remarkable adaptation rate, one scientist clicked. Subject demonstrates consistent tactical innovation, incorporating foreign combat techniques into existing strategic framework. Potential military application significant, another added. Recommend accelerated testing protocol. That's when Zeke spotted something on their holographic displays, designs for what appeared to be military training facilities. Dozens of them, being constructed across Vurian space. The arena wasn't just a research center, it was a prototype. Back in his cell, Zeke shared his discovery with Drex and Thrix through their now-established communication methods. The Varians were planning to mass-produce combat training facilities, using the data gathered from arena fighters to create advanced military training programs. They're not just studying us, Zeke realized. They're using us to build an army. Thrix's tentacles rippled with concern, projecting images of worlds at war. Drex's circuits dimmed. The Varians have long desired to expand their territory. With an army trained in combat techniques from across the galaxy, they could start a war that would consume everything, Zeke finished. Unless. Drex's circuits pulsed inquiringly. Zeke smiled, the same smile that had once made his Special Forces teammates nervous. Unless someone teaches them why stealing other people's combat techniques isn't the same as understanding them. His next few matches showed a subtle shift in strategy. Instead of simply winning, Zeke began demonstrating increasingly complex combat techniques, ones that seemed impressive but had subtle, exploitable flaws. The Vurian scientists eagerly recorded everything. They want to learn how humans fight. Zeke explained to his fellow fighters during exercise period. Let's give them some lessons they'll never forget. The plan was subtle, long-term, and more than a little dangerous. But as Zeke watched the Varians systematically document his intentionally flawed combat techniques, he couldn't help but appreciate the irony. They'd built the perfect system to study warfare. Now it would become their greatest vulnerability. Phase 1 was complete. Time for the real games to begin. The Rebellion. The thing about running a covert operation inside an alien battle arena was that everything was being watched, which meant the best place to hide was in plain sight. Zeke had learned this lesson well during his Special Forces days. Sometimes the most secure communication happened right under the enemy's nose. Excellent form. Drex called out during their scheduled sparring session in the training arena. To any observer, it looked like two champions practicing combat techniques. In reality, every move, every strike, every staged stumble carried coded information. Zeke blocked a punch while simultaneously signaling, Section 4 security patterns mapped. He countered with a sweep that meant, Thrix has contacted the lower-level fighters. The Varians' own combat analysis system had become their biggest blind spot. They were so focused on studying fighting styles that they missed the subtle communications hidden within them. Every match in the arena now carried secret messages, every training session was a covert meeting, and every staged defeat contained coded instructions. Sparkles, their crystalline ally, had proven particularly valuable. Its species communicated through light patterns, making it perfect for transmitting complex messages during matches. The arena's energy barriers would sparkle with seemingly random reflections that were actually detailed blueprints and security protocols. Champions Challenge requested, the AI announced one morning. Human Combat Specialist vs. Myrician Swarm Lord. Special Observation Protocols in effect. This was the opportunity they'd been waiting for. The Myrician was one of their recruited allies, and the Champions Challenge format meant reduced security protocols. The Varians' eagerness to study high-level combat scenarios was about to backfire spectacularly. The match began with typical arena fanfare. The crowd roared as Zeke and the Myrician, a being composed of thousands of smaller insect-like creatures, took their positions. What the audience saw was an epic battle between champions. What actually transpired was the final coordination of their rebellion. Security nodes identified, the Myrician communicated through complex swarm patterns that looked like attack formations. Lower-level fighters ready. Zeke responded through a series of combat rolls and strikes. Drex has compromised the weapon systems. Sparkles has the energy grid mapped. Execute at third bell. Their real advantage lay in something the Varians had never considered: diversity. Every fighter brought unique abilities, perspectives, and ways of thinking that went far beyond simple combat techniques. Thrix's empathic abilities could detect guard movements. Sparkles could interface with the arena's energy systems. Drex understood the facility's cyber infrastructure. And humans? Humans excelled at putting all the pieces together. The next day, Zeke was summoned to the Advanced Assessment Chamber. The Varian scientists had noticed his evolving combat style and wanted a detailed analysis. Perfect. Subject demonstrates remarkable tactical flexibility, one scientist noted, manipulating holographic combat data. Recommend immediate integration into training protocols. About that, Zeke smiled, watching the time display. You might want to hold off on the update. The third bell rang, signaling the day's main events. Throughout the facility, carefully orchestrated chaos erupted. Thrix's tentacles breached power conduits in precise locations. Sparkles transmitted corrupted energy patterns through the barrier system. Drex's cyber infiltration scrambled security protocols. And in every cell block, fighters began executing the flawed combat techniques Zeke had been feeding to the system, moves that looked impressive but actually created cascading system failures when performed simultaneously. Warning, multiple system anomalies detected, the AI announced, its voice distorting. Security protocols, error, combat analysis matrix corrupted. The Varian scientists frantically worked their controls, but every combat solution the system proposed had been compromised by months of carefully planted flaws. Their perfect combat analysis engine had become a maze of false data and tactical trapdoors. Fascinating thing about combat data, Zeke explained to the stunned scientists as alarms blared. It's only as good as your understanding of context. You recorded all our moves perfectly, but you never understood why we fight the way we do. Throughout the facility, gathered fighters executed their roles with precision. Lower-level gladiators overwhelmed guard posts using techniques specifically designed to confuse the automated defense systems. Mid-tier champions targeted crucial infrastructure nodes. The elite fighters, led by Drex and Sparkles, secured the control centers. The Varians had created the perfect storm. They'd gathered the galaxy's greatest warriors, given them time to train together, and provided them with intimate knowledge of the facility's systems. All because they'd been so focused on studying combat techniques that they'd forgotten about combat philosophy. You wanted to know how humans fight? Zeke asked as Thrix's tentacles breached the chamber wall right on schedule. Rule 1, we're really good at making friends. The facility's power grid fluctuated as Sparkles executed the final phase of their plan. Emergency force fields snapped into place, except they weren't responding to Varian commands anymore. Drex's cyber infiltration had given them control of the core systems. Rule 2, Zeke continued, watching the Varian scientists back away from their now useless controls. We know the difference between fighting and winning. Throughout the arena complex, freed fighters were securing weapons, neutralizing resistance, and following the carefully planned extraction routes. Years of recorded combat data were being purged or corrupted beyond recovery. The Varians' dream of a perfect combat database was dissolving into chaos. But the real victory wasn't in the fighting, it was in what they discovered during their preparation. Hidden in the facility's secure databases were coordinates for all the planned military training installations, defense protocols, and most importantly, weaknesses in Varian military technology. Final rule, Zeke said as Thrix's empathic projection confirmed the success of their primary objectives. Never put your enemies in a room together and give them time to compare notes. The rebellion had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, but Zeke knew this was just the beginning. They'd freed themselves and destroyed the combat data, but the Varians would try again. They needed to end this permanently. As fighters from across the galaxy converged on their designated rally points, Zeke shared a knowing look with Drex. Phase 1 had been escape. Phase 2 would be making sure this never happened again. The Reckoning. The Vurian High Command's war room was everything Zeke expected, sleek, efficient, and completely unprepared for what was coming. Through the massive viewport, the sprawling capital city gleamed under twin suns, its architecture a testament to their technological superiority. But technology, as Zeke had learned long ago, wasn't everything. Security breach in Sectors 7 through 13, an automated system announced. Unknown combat patterns detected. Analysis systems failing. The Vurian commanders clicked their mandibles in agitation as their perfect defenses began to crumble. Their military response was exactly what Zeke had predicted: textbook formations, automated countermeasures, and combat drones programmed with their stolen fighting techniques. All useless against what was coming. Remarkable, isn't it? Zeke stepped out of the shadows, making the Vurian guards snap to attention. How you can have all the right moves but still lose the fight. Supreme Commander Vextrix's compound eyes fixed on him with cold calculation. The arena champion. How did you penetrate our defenses? The same way we broke your arena, by teaching you exactly what you wanted to learn. Zeke gestured to the tactical displays showing chaos erupting across the city. Every technique you stole, every combat pattern you recorded, had a fatal flaw built into it. Your entire military database is corrupted with beautiful, elegant mistakes. Outside, the rebellion was in full swing. Thrix's species had infiltrated the waterways, their tentacles disrupting crucial infrastructure. Sparkle's crystalline people were overwhelming power grids with precisely calibrated energy frequencies. Drex's cyber warriors had turned the Varian's own security systems against them. But the real masterpiece? The thousands of inferior fighters from the lower arena levels, each executing seemingly simple combat techniques that, when combined, created devastating tactical cascades that no defense system could predict. You studied how we fight, Zeke continued, but you never understood why we fight. Every species in your arena had centuries, sometimes millennia, of combat wisdom. You thought you could just download it like software. Our combat analysis is perfect, Vextrix insisted. We recorded every movement, every strategy. And that's exactly why you lost. Zeke pulled up a holographic display showing combat data streams. See these patterns? Beautiful, aren't they? Perfect form, flawless execution. And completely wrong. The display showed hundreds of fighters across the city, each performing techniques that looked exactly like what the Varians had recorded in their arena. But when executed together, they created chaos in the defense grid. Every countermeasure triggered another cascading failure. Humans have a saying, Zeke explained as another defense sector went dark. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. You recorded all our parts, but you missed the whole. Drex's voice came through their secure channel, central control systems compromised. Quantum encryption protocols disabled. Sparkle's light patterns signaled next, power grid reconfigured. Shield harmonics destabilized. Thrix's empathic burst carried the final confirmation, all teams in position. The hive mind is ready. Vextrix's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. You think freeing some arena fighters and disrupting our defenses will stop us? We'll build another facility. Start over. Perfect our combat database. No, Zeke interrupted softly. You won't. The holographic display shifted, showing something that made the Vurian commanders step back, their entire military database being systematically rewritten. Every combat technique, every tactical analysis, every carefully stolen bit of martial knowledge was being transformed. We're not destroying your combat data, Zeke explained. We're giving you new data. True data. The real wisdom behind why we fight the way we fight. Through the quantum networks that connected Vurian military installations, a new kind of knowledge was flowing. Not just combat techniques, but the philosophy behind them. The cultural context that made them work. The spiritual and emotional elements that turned movement into meaning. You wanted to know how the galaxy fights? Zeke gestured to the stream of data. Now you'll understand why we fight. The Virian capital's defenses hadn't just been breached, they'd been transcended. Every fighter from the arena had contributed not just their combat techniques, but their species' entire martial philosophy. The result was something entirely new, a true understanding of galactic combat arts. Your choice is simple, Zeke addressed the Virian High Command. Continue trying to steal and control combat knowledge, or join a new kind of alliance. One where we share our wisdom freely, but with the understanding that comes with it. The data flowing through their systems wasn't just combat techniques anymore. It was stories, cultures, the accumulated wisdom of thousands of species' martial traditions. The very thing the Varians had tried to reduce to data points was now becoming their salvation. Supreme Commander Vextric studied the displays for a long moment, compound eyes reflecting the streaming data. Finally, the commander spoke, "You could have destroyed us. Instead, you chose to teach us. That's the thing about real combat wisdom," Zeke smiled. It's not about destroying your enemy. It's about transforming them. In the days that followed, the Virian military underwent a transformation. The arena was converted into a true training facility, one where warriors from across the galaxy could come to share their knowledge freely. The combat database became a library of martial philosophy, preserving not just the how of combat, but the why. And Zeke? He did what humans do best, he adapted. The former arena champion became the first Earth instructor at the new Galactic Combat Academy, teaching new generations of warriors that the greatest victories don't come from perfect technique, but from understanding why we fight in the first place. As he watched students from 100 worlds training together, sharing their species' combat wisdom, Zeke couldn't help but appreciate the irony. The Varians had built their arena to steal the galaxy's combat knowledge. Instead, they'd created something far more powerful, a place where the art of combat could bring species together. Ready for today's lesson? Drex asked, now serving as the Academy's cyber combat instructor. Zeke nodded, watching Sparkles demonstrate energy techniques to a group of fascinated Virian cadets while Thrix taught psychic defense to another class. Today's lesson is the same as always, he replied. The best way to win a fight is to make it unnecessary in the first place. The twin suns set over the Virian capital, their light reflecting off the transformed arena's crystalline towers. In the end, the Varians had gotten exactly what they wanted, just not in the way they expected. They'd wanted to understand how the galaxy fought. Instead, they learned why we fight at all. And sometimes, that makes all the difference.